the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture and Rural Development and Natural Resources will come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Thank you, Representative Borton.
Here.
Representative Mueller.
Here.
Representative Green.
Present.
Representative Ross. Representative Saban. Here. Representative O'Neill. Representative McKinney. Sir, you have 4 of 7 members. You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk. Rep. DeSena moves to approve the minutes from May 7th. There being no objections, the minutes are approved. Sorry to our presenters that I don't have a full house. Normally, everybody's here. There they come. All right. All right. I will slowly thank you all for being here today.
Just had to make a grand entrance.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people at the top with it.
Yeah, I know. The elevators were busy this morning. All right. Today we're going to hear from Tim Boring, Director of the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, Sylvia Renteria. Did I pronounce that right? All right. Thank you. Director of Finance and Budget, and Legislative Liaison Michaela Heffernan regarding the department's legislative priorities. So the three of you have the floor. Feel free to go in whatever order you'd like.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thrilled to be here to talk a little bit about the work that MDART is doing and hit on some of the high points of our recommended budget here for the year ahead of us. So wanted to start with this slide here, which I think really frames up the current state of agriculture in Michigan. And really some statistics here that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I'll point out a couple notable updates to this. If we had presented this slide to you 5 years ago or 6 months ago, some of these numbers would have looked different. We continue to lose the number of farms we have here in Michigan. The most notable number on this slide to me is the fact that we are now listing 200 commodities produced here in Michigan as the updated National Ag Statistics numbers rather than the 300 we would have used weeks or months ago. Concerning to me are the fact that we continue to lose some of the diversification of production here in Michigan. And certainly some of this, many of these crops are still grown here that would have been counted among the 300 a year ago, but we've tipped below the critical point that NASS considers these as officially large commodities here in the state. We're going to continue to maintain that talking line here that we're the most diverse agricultural state in the country with a reliable access of water. But I think some of the trends here are concerning of the fact of what the diversification of Michigan agriculture looks like and what that means for economic opportunities. And I'll also say, too, that this is really personal to me of the fact that I grew up on a diversified farm down in Stockbridge, and like many farms in our area, we had a lot of truck crops growing up. We specifically had pickling cucumbers and peppers and mint and tomatoes. Just down the road, it wouldn't be hard to find onions and potatoes and radish and carrots, and all of that is gone today. We are an area now that grows corn, soybeans, and a little bit of wheat. There are real economic ramifications to the fact that we've lost those higher value production systems. The pickling plant for pickles over in Eaton Rapids isn't there anymore. We don't have as many economic opportunities. We don't have as many jobs in our small town because we've lost some of these higher value production systems. So it's really been a motivating factor for me in my agricultural career, working in various segments of agriculture across the state, of the direction that we're going in agriculture here in Michigan, and what the economic and opportunity landscape looks like for the next generation coming in. So I think Michigan's at a place where we've got tremendous opportunity of how we seize upon where we are as a country that increasingly values where our food was grown, the quality of our food, how we're valuing the production of agriculture in rural and urban communities. I think we've got a lot of opportunity for how we continue to grow this. But for me, it's the motivating factor of why I feel so privileged to be in this role, to be a small part of continuing to invest in Michigan agriculture and doing it for farming families, communities, and the people of Michigan. So Our budget then that I'm going to really focus on here today is certainly in line with these broader administration goals that the Governor Whitmer has laid out. And this is really guiding work for us on a daily basis of how we're lowering costs and we're creating jobs. I take it seriously the fact that MDARD is one of the quality of life agencies, and I'll contend of the fact that I think we're a unique department. We're very small, but we have the opportunity to touch people's lives in such a dramatic way, in a way that most other departments probably can't. Of the fact that everybody here eats, everybody is engaged in the environment and some of the work that we touch on. So the idea of how we protect and defend Michiganders is really critical to our foundational mission as an organization. And we're striving every day then, of course, to make government work better and deliver for the people of Michigan as well. Our mission then is quite broad. We're actively involved in food safety and agriculture, environmental and economic interests. We do this through a lot of the ways that you probably would often think of agricultural work, of the dairy inspectors, the produce inspectors, the folks that are out there on a daily basis with a real mindset of partnership and compliance and helping pesticide regulators understand regulations and getting everybody to a place where we've got predictable and reliable situations on which to operate. We do a lot of work that you might not always think of, too, in terms of consumer protection. I'm sure you've all noticed the MDARD logos in your gas pumps. And so we've got a really active laboratory division of doing a lot of different work that impacts the people's lives in ways you don't often think of. We're really prioritizing in the department building up resiliency in both our cropping systems, but also economic supply chain systems. We're going to continue to focus on the diversification of ag production. We're doing all this through a really purposeful lens of economic prosperity, of developing economic opportunities for people, and we're making our department the best place in state government to work. So we have 4 bureaus within our department. I'm sure many of you are already quite familiar with these large bureau structures. There's an awful lot of work that goes on in every one of these different divisions, right? From support for county fairs to the predictability of environmental applications such as through Right to Farm. We do a lot of food safety work. We certainly have been actively engaged in a lot of disease response on animal operations that's gone on the last year. And then I mentioned some of the work that our laboratory and consumer protection division is engaged in. I mentioned already that we are a very small agency. We're also pretty small in terms of a budget breakdown. Our budget comprises 0.18% of the state budget. And you've got an idea here then of that budgetary distribution between our 4 different bureaus and a lot of the prioritization of where our financial resources are dedicated across the department then. I'll talk briefly then about some of our key budget highlights then in the governor's recommended budget. The largest area that we're looking to continue to augment and build up is broadly around protecting Michigan's food supply. A lot of this is directly on the heels of our response to HPAI here in Michigan, notably not only in poultry, but a year ago now where we were really in the midst of the response to this on dairy farms. We were following a pretty established playbook by USDA officials on the poultry side of things, but the dairy situations were really unknowns to us, unknowns to the agricultural community about what the threats of the disease were, what some of these long-term implications to the financial viability of dairy farms, how we controlled and worked on biosecurity in new ways in real time on dairy farms. We've learned a lot of lessons from that. I think one of the biggest prioritization levels is the investment in biosecurity and helping farms understand, conceptualizing what it means to be fending off the threat of disease in a new and different way, and really continue that attitude that we have on our department of partnership and working with farms to understand best available science and implement it in real time. So we're looking to really undertake this effort through all the species that we have here in Michigan. Poultry producers have dealt with this disease for a long time, and a poultry operation today will look quite different now than it did at the start of what this HBA outbreak looked like 10 years ago. Dairy farmers are grappling with this in a new way. There are threats, though, to any number of other species of livestock production here in Michigan. We're working to augment those capabilities in a lot of different ways. We're in the midst of a development of a proposal to USDA's Grand Challenge with HBAI here to bolster our response here in the state. But if you watch the news here over the last few days around some steps that USDA has taken to close the southern border to cattle, horses, and one other species of animal coming in, to prevent the continued spread of New World screwworm into the markets here in Michigan, or in the United States. We continue to see these kinds of concerns around animal diseases. That threat hasn't passed simply because HBAI isn't the same kind of challenge we were dealing with a year ago. We continue to see a lot of threats to what the viability of production systems are here in Michigan. We're looking at some investments here then in plant, soil, and pest diagnostics. A proposal here that's split between both one-time and ongoing funding, looking to increase testing capacity and support services for plant disease, soil health, invasive species detection. Work that's looking to address a few immediate needs that we continue to hear from stakeholders. We have a pretty robust export industry here in Michigan, both across the United States and internationally, for things like nursery products and crops, landscape plants and crops that are produced here in Michigan. And the continued need to be able to certify those sorts of things as free from invasive species and any pest threats. Continue to ramp up the capacity in our department to be able to deliver those services for businesses across the state so that we can continue to access that market. It's certainly an area of opportunity. We're continuing to really invest in what our soil health testing capacity might be here in Michigan. As a farmer, if you're interested in obtaining a soil health test, and if you're a farm that's prioritized implementation of a lot of these regen ag and soil health practices, a soil health test that considers some of the biological components of your soil is likely to come back with lower fertilizer recommendations than what a traditional chemical test might be. So there are some real cost savings here with the implementation of new and developing science around soil health. But if you're a farmer, you're shipping that soil sample to Missouri or North Dakota or New York for testing. We're looking to be able to implement some of that kind of work here in Michigan so that we're keeping that soil sample data, that kind of services in the state here, and bringing on some specialized interpretation of those test results, specifically to Michigan cropping systems. In all due respect to soil scientists in Missouri or North Dakota, I would question the fact of those individuals being able to tailor fertilizer recommendations to wheat or dry beans or potatoes grown here in Michigan. We're looking to aid in our rural prosperity and our rural development fund here by raising the administrative cap around the Rural Development Fund Board grants that we have through our department. This is work that's funded out of mining severance up in the Upper Peninsula. The mines are doing quite well, and they continue to increase production, which means we continue to have funds coming in for the investment into a lot of rural development areas, infrastructure development, rural capacity building, business development. We continue to see a lot of interest and a lot of great projects that come in for this fund. So adjusting this cap here so that we're more able to fully utilize the fund balances within this is certainly something that we see as going to have direct benefit and results for the people of Michigan. And then finally, the Freshwater Protection Fund reauthorization is up again this year. Reoccurring conversation around the sunset fees or the sunset provisions every 5 years. In Michigan here, there are assessments on fertilizer and pesticides that go into the Freshwater Protection Fund that fund a lot of work to further conservation goals in the state of Michigan. It's foundational to the MEP program and support within the department for that. It provides some really critical technician funding in conservation districts to fund that work and other technical assistance on the part of getting practices on farms. It's historically funded things like Clean Sweep, which is unwanted pesticide recycling that is run through conservation districts. So conversations on this have been going on. They continued with farm groups and stakeholder organizations, the industry, about what we collectively value in terms of some of these environmental programs, what the continued costs to run these programs might be. So that's a piece of this budget as well, that we're continuing a lot of engagement with stakeholder communities about reauthorizing these funds, so we've got continued support for this critical work. So with that, that's a really top-line overview of both our department and some areas of investment and opportunities that we see. I'm proud of the work that our staff continues to do. I think we continue to see a lot of opportunities for growth and investment in agriculture here for the benefit of the people of Michigan. And so some of these budget items then are going to position us well to continue to grow the agricultural industry on the behalf of people. So with that, Mr. Chair, happy to entertain any questions.
Absolutely. We will go to questions now. We'll start with Rep. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions that aren't connected.
Okay.
Go ahead. Okay. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Director. You've delineated several issues we're facing in the agricultural industry. I'm seeing the exec rec that there's a proposal to increase fees on our upstream, the MEAP program, which will increase the cost of production, loss of profit, increase bankruptcy, decrease commodities. That's sort of the way we've been running. With that being the case, there's a tremendous amount of grants that we've been giving out and redundancies in the budget, such as double funding for regenerative farming. Would you support reprioritizing the funding and expenditures so that we don't create a greater burden on the ag industry as a whole?
Appreciate the question, absolutely. Let me clarify too, I guess, a little bit about what those freshwater protection investments have been. And really some backstory. I worked closely 10 years ago with Senator Green on the reauthorization of this fund. And I think it's healthy of the fact that we have periodic sunsetting of this fee, because it brings all the groups together to talk about what's collectively valued around environmental protections and freshwater protection, and then how we're going to be able to fund a lot of that work. So these assessments on pesticides and fertilizers have historically been done with an awful lot of industry participation. Farm Bureau has been a really active participant in this. The corn growers historically have had active roles. The environmental groups obviously have perspectives on this kind of work. There's generally been support within the industry in the past to continue some investments within this funding to give these environmental benefits, and that's come from farm groups as well. Certainly there are costs that are easily passed on to farmers. Some of the changes that were made 10 years ago to the pesticide authorization funds have probably put more of the burden on the pesticide industry themselves rather than direct tie-throughs down to the farm level. So you could say that some of those changes have probably lessened the direct burden on farmers. I know that the farm group conversations have been active over in this reauthorization cycle and in the past of where this balance needs to be. Currently we're at $1 per ton assessments on fertilizers here in Michigan. And knowing too that the farm economy is pretty tenuous, input costs are really high. Like, how do we collectively value these sorts of things and make sure that we're correctly prioritizing what those costs are onto farmers? I think there's been a lot of value in the investment of these fees into the services that farmers get, and we continue to hear that so much of this funding that goes into conservation districts that's in farmers' backyards is seen and appreciated. Or continue to work then, if you mentioned some of this work within regenerative agriculture, to stand up these complementary programs that are in response to the challenges the farmers tell us they're seeing. There continues to be needs for technical assistance of how we implement, best available science that we continue to develop in real time onto farms. So ensuring that the conservation district technician support that the freshwater fund facilitates that those individuals are well positioned to be able to deliver programming from across the department and other external partners is a piece of this as well. With some of the questions in what the role of federal agencies is going to be, conservation districts, as many of you know, are often co-located with NRCS. And there's a lot of purposeful work on a conservation district office of how you augment those NRCS services. As we see more about what those federal programs are going to be, I think that will be a continued point as well of how can we be best leveraging the technical assistance that's facilitated through Freshwater Protection Fund to be able to address those needs that farmers constantly see in an ever-evolving landscape.
I know some of the struggle. One of the cool things about Lansing is as we get, a lot of the big wigs come and we cut deals. One of the cool things about our job is we get to go back home and talk to the people who had the deal cut for them. And they're not always quite as excited about the deals. And then as well with the regenerative, I know Michigan State University has a division of regenerative agriculture, and then I think we're paying the VFW to have a 600-acre farm. So it's like, okay, how are we, if we're trying to make sure that we are protecting our industry, the upstream feed down into the downstream ag, and then we're looking at how can we be as efficient as possible so that we can not have 100 commodities next time we have this meeting.
Absolutely. You brought up two really good points there, too. MSU Center for Regenerative Agriculture really has been recognized nationally as one of these leading organizations. And so Jason Roundtree that heads that center, his primary focuses have been in beef cattle. And that Lake City experiment station, I did a lot of work there in forages and potato rotations as an undergrad at Michigan State, and the research station looks a lot different today of the fact that Dr. Roundtree's participation up there around building and delivering some economic opportunities for folks up there of how you're running beef cattle in a different sort of mindset of production systems. Our Regen Ag team at MDART has been closely working with Dr. Roundtree of making sure that we've got a lot of synergy and we're implementing complementary programs that aren't duplicative. That continues to be a real priority around Michigan State University's extension program as well. And so those groups are working on a daily basis. The demonstration farm down in Eaton Rapids at the National VFW home was originally conceived as an opportunity to leverage some of the staffing capacity we had through an AmeriCorps grant that was a part of one of the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities programs funded out of the federal government, about how that we continue to look, again, in a complementary way, in partnership with other state agencies. So the VFW home has like a 600-acre farm that they have just been renting out, leasing to a neighboring farm. And as we continue to talk about regenerative agriculture and we hear these needs from the industry around manpower and skilled workforce development, there are some natural synergies there about utilizing some of these federally funded positions to build out what it means to develop skills in a new way with veterans, with a community that we haven't always engaged in the same kind of way that we probably should be if we're really serious about workforce development within agriculture. We talk a lot in agriculture about the fact of how we're going to find folks that are perhaps interested in signing up for 12 or 14-hour days and during different times of the year, that have a natural proclivity for like mechanical aptitude, folks that are willing to work hard, to come in with some skills already in the books like CDLs. Veterans are a group that we want to do more with. And so when you talk about with our partners in the veteran community about what their limitations are, they want opportunities for folks to come back to the States, to have jobs, to have careers and economic opportunities. So we've really positioned that work as win-wins in achieving some of these goals that are in a shared way. With some of the cancellations, some of these federal grants, the veterans groups have actually come through and are standing up and providing funding for that operation down in Eden Rapids to continue this next year. So there's certainly, I think, been some appreciation for the value of this program through other ways. And so I think we're doing a great job of leveraging a lot of these funds and get some new money into funding sources for agriculture because others are increasingly seeing the value of the work we're doing here.
I guess my second question, I don't want to use the term moonlighting. One of the things, other things I do inside of the legislature on a national level is I function in the energy world. I noticed end of last week, that there came out a waiver program from the feds regarding summer fuel and the changes there because of the energy emergency and allowing more ethanol throughout the summer months. However, Michigan has not adopted that summer mix waiver. And so actually it was April 28th, the waiver was allowed for E15 use. Are we going to be following that and allowing the E15 into our gasoline throughout the summer months?
The press release in the Michigan waiver should have gone out a week ago last Friday. So yes,
Okay.
we already are doing that work. And I know that specific date because in the past that we've had further notice from the federal partners around the implementation of some of those, the waivers that are extended for state authorization. We really scrambled to make sure that we got that out after hours on last Friday. So yes, Michigan is consistent with those waivers as we've done in the past.
Yeah, since 1996. So what you're saying is we are, with the waiver, we're still allowing E15 throughout the summer months.
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, Rep. McKinney.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director Morin, for being here and the team. Just want to highlight before, because I have just two separate questions as well. I'm going to keep it to two. But just want to highlight your service and you coming down to my district last year to meet with some of our urban farmers and talking about support from the department for a lot of our urban ag, what's going on in Detroit and surrounding areas. So thank you so much for your time and coming to the district. So my first question is around labeling. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, lose track of days, but we passed in the House some legislation that put together some labeling for lab meat lab meat in particular. Can you kind of go through like our labeling process right now in the state? I know a lot of it comes from USDA at the federal level, but what is the state's role in terms of labeling our food properly? Because I've talking to a lot of community members in the district, and you know, when I go to a grocery store, folks are very weary at this moment, looking at, is the government really doing its role and responsibility to ensure that this food is protected? And so folks aren't necessarily believing in the labeling. And can you highlight some of the stuff that you guys are doing so we can, you know, put some of those worries aside for our people?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, I want to say, appreciate you hosting me here down in your district. I think there's a real opportunity for us to be talking to about the value of agriculture. It's not just rural communities and rural people. Like there's some, like this is meaningful kind of work, and it can deliver in a real way for communities in suburban and urban areas as well. We have a lot of suburban food processing that's like fundamental to the economy. The importance of food production in local areas, regardless of like the geographic distribution, like has resonated with me of how universal that is. So we're dedicated to making sure that we're continuing to assist growers, urban, suburban, rural, no matter where. To the point about labeling, like I probably can't speak in depth around all the federal labeling aspects of this and how our agency directly interfaces with all of those. There are a few points I can bring up around like this federal interface with the states in a lot of ways. There's been a lot of news around proposed changes at FDA. Some of this has been in the works for a while, of budgetary constraints that FDA continues to be under. Organizations that do a lot of this labeling work. And how a lot of the inspection work might shift to the states moving forward. Michigan is already a state that does the tremendous amount of this FDA inspection work on a state level currently. So when you hear talk about some of this federal work shifting to a state level, in that specific instance, like we've already got a really good relationship going on there, and we've already got a lot of that capacity here in the state. So our folks are interfacing with the feds in these inspection areas in a lot of ways. To that point about weariness around labeling, and certainly these have been national issues that have gone on for quite a while, right? There's been cool of country of origin labeling around how we characterize where blueberries might be produced, of coming in, and the ability to put product of USDA labeling on them when that might not have been the exact position of origin for them. Those are always things that I think need to continue and really speak to the trust, I believe, that's important for consumers to have around labeling. There's calls around continued evolution of organic food labeling, and do we create labeling system for regenerative systems? And that's certainly something that we've heard. But like you point out, I think there's kind of a weariness around this topic. And I think it becomes really confusing for consumers to continue to have a myriad of labeling on products. Within our kind of scope on this, I think we're going to continue to really prioritize outcomes and focus on the back end results of things rather than the process and kind of the manufacturing of value of just creating a simple label instead of having some really defendable results that we could point to and that I think do a better job of conveying trust. So those are continued conversations I think we have both at state level and a national level, the right role of labeling, but with the underlying aspect here of how do you continue to deliver for people, have trust in those systems, and at a time when I think it's really important is to be talking in a meaningful and demonstrable way about what the value of food is and what the value of agricultural systems are.
Thank you. And then my second question. Sure. Okay, thank you, Chairman. And this is surrounding, and I say this a lot in committee, around the cuts, right? So I think it was about a month ago, we got news of the USDA federal program cuts for our local food banks. And so, I've gotten calls from our local food banks, very concerned. And for the state of Michigan, I think it's around $4.3 million in cuts, which equates to around 2 million meals from, last month in April all the way through August this year. And so, what is our department at the state level doing to try to circumvent and fill in those gaps? Because people in my community, I talk about all the time as well, represent the poorest house district in the entire state. They rely on this food. And so, what can the state do and what can we do as legislators to fill in those gaps?
So a lot of those food access programs from the federal government come into departments besides MDARD, right? DHS, Department of Education. A lot of our federal food programs are over a wide variety of agencies. So a lot of that work isn't directly impacting MDARD and the kinds of programs that we're working to deliver food access. But I think the really important part to talk about from the MDARD perspective is the fact that we are a state that grows food, and that kind of cuts of that shift of how we're changing eating habits in many ways has demonstrable impact for our farmers. A lot of the fresh fruits and vegetables that are produced on Michigan farms that go through those systems, and sometimes those really complex and well-developed distribution centers like Gleaners down in the greater Detroit area, facilities that would rival any sort of distribution center from a grocery perspective. Those fresh fruit and vegetables probably are a lot of times more expensive than some of these higher processed foods that you can go to the grocery store and more cheaply feed your family. I will say, I think there's some real health implications of that if we're looking to combat these broader challenges we have of the people in Michigan aren't as healthy as they probably should be. And there could certainly probably be some budgetary savings if we weren't so concerned around some of the health programs. Those sorts of things have real demonstrable impact for producers here in Michigan, and especially those smaller and medium-sized farms that have counted on those kinds of programs and that kind of market access to continue to stand up their farms. We have a really efficient food distribution system in the United States. We have alarming numbers of imported fresh fruits and vegetables that come in to this country. The idea here that, yes, that makes food oftentimes cheap at the grocery store, but I think it's an incomplete valuation structure of the fact that if we're continuing to prioritize bringing asparagus and blueberries from Peru instead of from our own backyards, I think that's to our greater detriment. So there are going to be a lot more conversations, and a lot of the focus on what these nutrition programs are going to be in the days and weeks and months to come. But for us here in Michigan, I think it's really important to talk about, too, that represents demand for Michigan farms, and it's the decreased opportunities then for us to be building opportunities.
Thank you.
Okay, Rep. Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. Thank you guys for coming forward. And Representative McKinney, come talk to me later about that. That's my budget. Happy to talk to you about that. I have concerns in our government as a whole, communications. I think we don't communicate with the end user anywhere near as much as we should. Want you to tell me what kind of conversations you do have. Do you have, it doesn't have to be you, director, directly, but are you in the department meeting with the meat producers, the farmers, having these roundtable discussions? And it doesn't have to be large groups, but we need to talk to them more, because I'm a pesticide sprayer, okay? Not anymore. I've been relieved of that duty since I'm here in Lansing, but we don't always look at on a golf course in particular, we used to be 2 products to put a golf course to bed. Now it's 7, 8, and 3 times the cost. So do we always, we need to think about these things. Now that's not, sorry, Mr. Chair and everybody else, that's not necessarily an MDARD issue, that's more of an EPA issue, but I'm concerned that we don't have enough conversations with the end user, meat producers, butchers, packers.
Yeah.
I'd like to know what you guys are doing, what kind of conversations you do have out there.
I can speak a lot to this. And I agree with your statement around the fact it doesn't always matter on the size. Sometimes those smaller, more intimate discussions are more fruitful. We were up in Grayling area here 3 or 4 weeks ago with Senators DeMoose and Cherry talking to maple syrup producers around some of these real-time impacts they're seeing from the devastation of the ice storms up there. Maple syrup producers up in that part of the world were halfway, 2/3 through the production season. It is absolute devastation in some of these forests. And so we were up there talking about what are the immediate kind of concerns that folks have, what are the barriers they're running into, and like how do we longer term position the increased the continued viability of the industry and those individual producer outlooks. Sometimes those things aren't direct actions that we at MDARD need to take, but it's questions in the clarity around Farm Service Agency regulations and how producers are getting that information at a time when they're seeing reductions in what the workforce looks like within USDA. There's often times that we can continue on a state level to really amplify calls for the exemptions that are needed so producers can get into the woods and remove taps and lines so that they're not violating their eligibility for programs. So we've really prioritized getting out and holding a lot of these smaller roundtables. In the last couple of years, we've created a specific exec office position of community engagement at MDARD. That's a big part of the work is talking to producers and talking to industry groups, making sure that we're hearing everything that we need to be hearing, and being able to have people in the rooms at meetings doing this kind of work. And I'd finally say, too, that to not hammer home the point too much, but the MDARD culture here of compliance and partnership with the industry, sometimes it's not necessarily myself or the folks that are in Lansing every day being out there talking to the round tables and individual with producers. But I had the opportunity yesterday morning within our plant pesticide and pest management periodic team meeting to recognize an inspector, a pesticide inspector, with the governor's coin, who we specifically got positive feedback from companies that he was working with, that they called him because they didn't understand the regulations and how do I navigate all this kind of stuff. And he took a bunch of time and walked people through about how they specifically apply pesticides to turf grass and how you're compliant with not only MDARD, but all of this stuff that goes on. And those companies specifically called us back to say, that guy's fantastic, you couldn't have picked a better job. That's what good government looks like. Now, that individual inspector prioritized his time of walking those businesses through everything and not necessarily just going out and implementing checklists. He could probably get through more pesticide companies of the core kind of quantifiable work if he didn't prioritize doing that. But we've got a really good culture of folks that have placed the priority on just what you're talking about, of working with companies. So I think we're in a good place there in a lot of ways. And finding that balance between making sure that we're getting through all the sizable workloads we have while still making sure that we're taking time to do things in the right way.
If I could just quick add, I just recommend also cherry industry. I'm going to bring that up because I'm in that area. I recommend also talking to multiple groups inside the industry. If you go just to the Cherry Institute and talk to them, you may get a total different answer than you may get from farmers in northern Antrim County or Manistee. So make sure it's well-rounded, those conversations. You're talking to everybody inside the group.
I'm on the mailing lists for those, the new group of cherry farmers that have started meeting periodically to talk about some of these challenges. So absolutely. I will say, too, that the new leadership over at CMI, I've been encouraged by. I think there's a willingness to listen and to be delivering for the industry in a real way. But absolutely, we're taking some time to making sure we're hearing all the perspectives.
Check and verify, all right?
You bet.
Thank you.
Rep. O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Director, and your team for being here. I tell you, you mentioned earlier that, which we all know that MDARD budget is very small. But I would really say that it's one of the most important departments we have, just based on the conversations we have and the impact of what you do impact the end user, our constituents. So thank you for all that you do and your team also. I got so much stuff on my notes, but I can't say it all. But just the fact that you mentioned the import of fresh fruit and vegetables, how that's sort of reverse of what Michigan is all about. Can you elaborate on that? Because when I grew growing up, now we had pear trees, apple trees, we had grapevines. They were all throughout the neighborhood. Growing up, they were readily available, but you rarely see that now in our neighborhoods, and so when you talk about food deserts, in my town, every week there's this church that gives out boxes of food, and just the other day I rode through the line in terms of how far the line was, and it was like 6, 7, 8 blocks long. They were waiting for the start of the distribution of those boxes of food to be distributed, and so. And going back to my colleague's concern about, there's the quality of the food, in terms of it results of what you intake. It also, exacerbate health issues if it's not healthy food, et cetera. So there's so much there. But what's the issue that you see as why we're not producing our own food more so than importing, like we used to do? Produce it right here in Michigan. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I certainly can. Thank you for bringing that up. I think there's a few points to this. Broadly, and I think this is happening, right? The the grappling with of how we value agricultural production and how we value what's done in our own backyards and how we value what agriculture can be showing up and making a difference in the lives of everyday people across the state. And we see a lot of that in places where there's pressure on this, right? Of land use decisions might be made up in Traverse City and how we're making sure that, like we've got a viable cherry industry and how important that is for the culture of these areas. But on a really nuanced level, what we're specifically doing to solve bottlenecks and address these problems and get to the place where we've got economic opportunities for farms to be engaged in the food system in new and different ways. This was really the genesis of this farm-to-family program that was part of last year's budget. So as we went around and had a lot of conversations, especially with some of these non-traditional groups that MDOT hasn't always engaged with, smaller farm groups, folks that are involved in food distribution, that are involved in restaurants, there are a lot of challenges around distribution and transportation and aggregation of product. And just how we get products that might be grown on a smaller or mid-sized farms into the distribution outlets so that they're available for commerce. And I had a conversation with Rep. DeSanta leading up to this, right? Like, what are the limitations? It's hard to get your product into a restaurant if you can't deliver consistent supply over a greater time period so that there's some predictability in the system. If you're a restaurant, if you're a school service, cafeteria, it is really easy to just simply pick up the phone and call Cisco or call Gordon or some of these, and it just shows up. And if you don't have enough time anyway, the value, it's not local stuff, it's not maybe the highest value, quality, but it's done and I don't have time to think about it. So that farm to family program was specifically working on how can we address these bottlenecks around distribution and transportation. So we're in the midst of rolling out in the final steps some granting opportunities to food hubs and to farm stops that are attempting to address some of this sort of stuff. The pilot efforts, we want to be able to show that we've got like good value for the investments in these funds, and then we'll be coming back to all of you and talking about the value of this and saying that this is a path to address some of this work. We talked a little bit about Rep. DeSanta about some of these farm stop concepts. If you're a farmer and you want market access, farmers markets have been a really viable way to do this. But now you're taking your Thursday night or your Saturday morning or your Tuesday afternoons and selling at a farmer's market. It's not always the greatest utilization of time for folks. There's some innovative retail outlets that have been pioneered down in Ann Arbor for a little while now around a consignment-based brick-and-mortar facility where you as the farmer take and drop off your product. These low-profit business model tax qualification organizations charge you a consignment of 25, 30%, and they handle all the back-end implementation of this. There's somebody running the cash register, stocking the shelves, keeping the lights onto the place. You as a farmer are farming, and you're not trying to sell product in the same kind of way. But those stores now are aggregating enough product that they can supply to restaurants. What we're going to continue to pursue within this too of how do you bring that kind of retail opportunity to communities, undervalued communities in rural and urban areas. And frankly, we've got too many desolate downtowns and small rural areas that don't have, the only access to a food system you might have today is a dollar store that's corporately owned. How do we work on having ways that locally fresh produce is available for consumers in your local area? It might be done in a kind of a community service valued proposition here, but how do you have food access with an eye here on the fact of how you diversify farms in different ways, and maybe you have another generation coming back and running cattle or sheep or growing sweet corn or tomatoes, and having a viable market outlet for that.
Thank you for that explanation. And, the conservation districts, as you mentioned earlier, also play a major role in that, would you say, in terms of?
Most definitely,
Okay.
yes.
So thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, you're welcome. Rep. DeSanta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming today, Director Boring. Going along the same theme of producing our own food, and I appreciate your comments, Michigan is 39th in beef production. 39th. And in comparison, Indiana, who's 35th, we're 39th at 96,000 cows. Indiana at 185,000, Wisconsin at 295,000 at number 30, and Ohio at 325,000 at number 29. And so the disconnect for me is I always associate Michigan Department of Agriculture as being the umbrella that oversees agriculture, right? And some of the biggest complaints I get from our industry is from Eagle. And I would think that Michigan Department of Agriculture would run agriculture, would approve our processors and have something to do. I know USDA is in here too, and I had proposed a Michigan meat inspection program. But I think the disconnect for me is why are we this far behind in beef production? And all I hear from the industry is how are the challenges. And I'm just wondering, so my question is, how can we incentivize people to get into this business or to expand in this business? And how can we regain the control to help the producer, not to discourage the producer, not to hurt the producer, but to encourage the producer to have facilities or have processing facilities that they can utilize so that we can produce the beef that we would consume in our own state. I see that as our biggest challenge right now, especially there's no quick fix to this. Ohio, Wisconsin, Indiana are basically outproducing us by triple. And we've got just as much opportunity, just as much land to do this. I'm wondering, what could we do to bring Michigan Department of Agriculture into the incentivization program and the umbrella that, do we need to move back claw back some of this approval to the Michigan Department of Agriculture instead of Eagle?
Well, I'll admittedly characterize myself as a row crop guy, not with a significant livestock background. But the idea here of livestock diversification on farms and continued economic opportunity for livestock producers, specifically beef producers in Michigan, has been something I've been really interested in. I've had some long conversations with Senator McBroom about understanding some of the historical implications of what Michigan's split state status with TB has meant for the industry here in Michigan, and what we need to continue to do to, one, maintain that split state status, and sometimes how precarious that categorization is, and what the loss of our ability to have split state status would mean for the industry by and large. Especially in those areas of the northern lower peninsula, the upper peninsula, where we've got a lot of opportunity to grow beef production up there. That's a really difficult topic. The continued investments in TB enforcement and protections, fencing, those aren't glamorous kinds of investments, but I think those are some of the things that we do need, right? It's increased processing capacity for sure, but some of it is of how we're mitigating some of those TB issues that kind of are an overarching concern here in a unique way for Michigan beef. One of the real areas that I want to continue to invest in and prioritize at MDR too is how can you grow a farm in a way that doesn't necessarily just require the investment of more land? That if the only way that you grow a farm is adding more acres, that's a recipe for fewer and fewer farms over time. So we've got to be able to figure out ways to get more value out of the acres that we have. Some of that then is bringing livestock production back onto row crop operations, where if you went back and talked to your grandfathers, they would know how to do this because they were the experts at doing this. And we've had farm policy in the United States that has really moved away from this, specifically in this eastern Corn Belt area. But the idea here of integrating livestock, as a row crop operator, I completely get the fact that you don't want to run beef cattle, but the neighbor kid down the road might want to. We've got to be able to figure out some creative solutions around how to cash flow the infrastructure investments of putting fencing back in, what some of the technical expertise is around running cattle back onto row crop operations. And then finally, I'd say continue to have distribution options. The next step beyond the processor of how do you get your product onto store shelves in a real viable way. There's been a lot of success in the freezer beef market. of almost kind of roadside stales for producers that have been innovative and kind of forward-thinking about how you market in a different way. But to really grow that market segment in a real way, you're going to have to get on into brick and mortar facilities in a different kind of way. So I think that MDARS historically hasn't spent a lot of time kind of in a retail setting like that. But if we're looking to how do you grow not only beef, but fruit and vegetables in a different way, being able to be in those spaces and understand those issues so that we can be addressing them in a different way, I think is where we need to be.
Thank you.
Okay, Rep. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is going to sort of piggyback off of Representative O'Neill's question about sort of on-sourcing some of our food again. It seems over the last several years, we are consistently hearing of foreign countries undercutting, so thus we're losing our cherry industry because of foreign, literally undercutting of our costs. As we are importing more and more of our food, we've talked about the meat program. We're also having in the health world lines shown on healthy living and healthy food. We're doing a lot in Michigan, raising our costs of production because we're safer with our pesticides. As we are importing cherries, as we're importing, you name it, from other countries, do they have the same safeguards of their food supply as we do here in America? And then what are we doing to protect our industries from being undercut?
I would probably be out of my depth to comment about the food safety standards in other countries. But I think it's a valid point of concern, and those are questions that we should be asking. I think that's a piece of this more broadly valuing what local production can be. And you talked about, you referenced Meat Pure. I think that continued recognition of producers that are doing things the right way is really important, of continuing to build trust in the food system. And some of this, you talk about the how we're talking in a different way about healthy food and healthy living in a different way. I think it's a recognition of the fact that like the food hasn't probably been as healthy as it really should be, and there should be increased valuation on like what goes into our diets, and a piece of that is where it comes from and how it's produced. Those are positions of opportunity for places like Michigan that other states just simply aren't going to have, because we can ramp up the kind of diversification, and we've got a knowledgeable producer base to be able to grow things in a little bit more difficult way. The trick is to get more value out of it too. A lot of this also becomes the advocacy and making sure that the federal delegation appreciates all these issues in a real way as well. And so much of this, the international movement of what products that come into the state are become federal issues, but making sure that we are continuing to engage on a state level from all of you, from certainly we're going to continue to do that as MDARD, around what the implications of the current policies and approaches might be, and where we can specifically position Michigan for success, I think are really important. And to be clear too, I don't think this is just simply a factor of fruits and vegetables. Prioritizing the production of higher value crops like dry beans and wheat and these other food crops that are grown in a lot of different ways across the state, like that has impact for farmers everywhere. Farmers up in the Thumb specifically have a really strong agricultural system because we've grown high quality food products in those areas in a row crop setting. But I would tell you every wheat farmer, unless they're really, really good at forward contracting, probably isn't going to plan on planting more wheat than they did this year, this coming fall. We continue to lose dry bean acres, not only to the plains up in the Dakotas, but to the provinces in Canada. In a lot of ways, it's easier to grow soybeans. So making sure that we're valuing the diversity of those food crops that are grown across the state, I think is a big part too.
So a couple years ago, there was a big push to add tariffs on to the cherries that were being imported. Did that have an effect on protecting our cherries?
I can't speak to all the details of what's gone on with that. Some of that I know was predating my time here at MDARD. The tariffs, for as much as attention that the soybean growers will tell you about their concern around tariffs in a place like, and the loss of market access, tariffs are a really nuanced issue here in Michigan of the fact of how they cut on both sides for so many of the products that we grow here. I think that continued thoughtfulness of how like we're building trade policies that are protective of some of the crops that we grow here, and with tariffs included, that needs to continue, but, acknowledging this is really complex, nuanced stuff.
All set? All right, I've got one question, kind of on a different topic, but I think it's something that you'll be able to speak on. I live up in Gaylord, so every week I travel up and down, 127, and I'm seeing more and more prime farmland being converted to wind and solar. Does the department keep track of how much prime farmland we're losing every year? And is there anything the department does to encourage farmers to keep their property in agricultural production?
Thank you for the question. The department doesn't actively track farmland here in Michigan. A lot of that becomes, and historically has been kind of the purview of National Ag Statistics Services within USDA. I think the awareness there of what is happening to farmland in a broader context, I think is important too, of the decisions that individual landowners continue to make around economic opportunities to do something different with farmland, right? Of whether it's renewable energy projects, whether it's continued housing. And really over time that we've lost a lot more farmland to urban sprawl and housing developments than really anything else. I think it speaks to the fact that we don't value farmland here in the state of Michigan, and probably the way that all of you who are serving on an agriculture committee can appreciate of what it is. Other states have done work around quantifying the value of farmland in a more definitive way. Like Iowa has corn suitability ratings that they numerically quantify the value of farmland in a different kind of way. So we're continuing though to monitor like how do you build value of farmland and recognize it for all the different ways, for all the things that it delivers for the people of Michigan in a more comprehensive way as well.
Okay, very good. Any other questions from members? Anything your colleagues want to add? They came along.
You haven't asked any good budget questions, or I would encourage to, Michaela on our staff here as legislative liaison has really prioritized, again, with the point about communications. Consider us a resource for all of you. Would love to be in your districts. We want to be talking to farm groups. We'll absolutely be there if there's a desire to organize small roundtables. We want to make sure we're hearing from producers. Michaela is a great point of contact on that. And we've got fantastic budget capacity here in our department to understand all the nuances of things going on. So thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. No, thank you for being here. You shared a lot of great information with us, which is helpful for us in our decision-making process. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. All right, we have no absent members. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.